Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Ace Dana, Inks. Ace Dana is the alias for Vincent Villuis. Sorry for butchered pronunciations as per usual. This guy is the founder of the label Ultimae Records, indie ambient music-centric label that turned out so many interesting and talented artists like Asura, Cell, Circular, Hole Bauman, I Awake, Hybrid Leisureland, Connect.Ohm, James Murray, and many others. Solar Fields and Carbon-Based Lifeforms and Sync 24 also used to release stuff to the label regularly, though they all broke off and did their own thing. And the former, Solar Fields, he used to work with Ace Dana in the group Huva Network. So much great ambient music that had an incredible flair for texture and detail, and usually having an organic flair to it that ran through nearly every artist and was captured in so many different ways. This label was so fascinating to follow for such a long time. I even got into their various artist compilations because many of them were so well constructed. See the Fahrenheit Project series, for example. Now, I've kind of already touched on this in my review of Carbon-Based Lifeforms Derelicts a few years ago, but I will freely admit, as much as I used to absolutely love the entire output of Ultimae Records and felt like they could basically do no wrong, they've kind of fallen off my radar in the past couple of years. The last time a project from this label came out that properly wowed me was Asura's Radio Universe in 2014, and since then the projects have been good, but have started to increasingly lean away from the more textured and organic sound that the entire label did so well, and towards some much more sterile and sounding blends. Not to mention, they came out a lot less frequently, and after a string of disappointing releases from artists like James Murray, Martin Nonstatic, and Mick Tech, I kinda ended up losing interest in the label entirely. Last new project I sat down with from Ultimae all the way through was the Greenosophy Chapter 2 compilation. That was almost 3 years ago now, and I didn't really think much of that one at the time. But this one specifically caught my interest because Ace Dana is an artist that has a well-established back catalog of quality solo material. When it came to his mainline releases, he had a pretty rock-solid track record, which I will illustrate by going down his discography so far. God, this brought back some memories. Very subtle ambient techno release that set forth the atmospheric formulas that most of Ultimae Records tended to follow. While it's not the most evocative or detailed release he's ever put out, it was good enough to buy a CD, and still holds up to me as pretty solid now. Especially love the first track, Natty Natty. This album gets a lot of play on my iPod on accident because it's the very first release on there, alphabetically by artist. But it's also a really relaxed, subtle, and all-around excellent ambient album, one of his best. Especially I've always loved the 7th track, which is just this super eerie solo piano thing. Don't miss. Pretty similar blend to Season 5, mostly straightforward ambient techno with deep, bassy grooves, a couple of psychedelic textures thrown around here and there. Also a bit more padded out. Not one of my biggest favorites from him, but still solid. Alright, and this is my personal favorite of his albums. Took his usual down-tempo sound, added a couple of instrumental flares, flutes, sitars, bells, whatever else applicable, and created a subtle but very immersive experience that's fully enjoyable all the way through. And this was my other big favorite, another great album that also happens to have a super smooth, continuous mix that almost makes it feel all like one constantly evolving track, yet still having just as much detail and texture as Leylines. Well, Leylines was probably a bit more consistent from an individual track perspective, but this was damn close. Also do not miss. Not as great as the previous two for me, tends to fall in the background pretty easily, but it did a deeper dive into his more laid-back sounds. It was pretty nice, and still up to par with his usual work. Alright, and this compilation of 3 EPs he did in collaboration with Mick Tech back in 2016, that was the last thing he'd put out as Ace Dana, and I distinctly remember not really feeling it, finding it a little too isolated and empty sounding for my tastes. And coming back to it, yeah. Not to say that sound doesn't still have its appeal, or this album doesn't still have its moments. It's not bad at all, but it is probably the least interesting project with his name on it, and delivers little to none of the organic warmth I associate with his style. Which brings us to here. So yes, I like Ace Dana a lot. He's had a lot of quality releases over the years. He is definitely one of my favorite names on Ultimae. And that in itself was what had me holding out hope for this album in particular. It may have been a very long time since he put out Pollen. And like I said, Far and Off didn't really pull me in like his previous projects did, but I have had a history of really liking his stuff, obviously if I own 3 CDs from the guy. And they weren't easy to find ones either. Hell, if CDs of Aftermath were available for a reasonable price, I might have sprung for that too. While I wasn't necessarily expecting another Ley Lines or Parameters, hopefully he would still bring something to the table that would live up to the reputation that he and the label previously built up. Really had my fingers crossed on this one, and after finally hearing it, well, it's still nothing exactly mind-blowing or the kind of thing that was so amazing I felt like it brought my interest in the label back full swing, but it is definitely better than Far and Off. The overall feel of the project is still quite cold and distant, doesn't quite have the same warmth or color or texture that his best projects do. It has fallen into the background pretty easily, and there's nothing here that I haven't already heard before to some extent. Feels kind of like maybe a Pete Namlook self-titled project in many parts, and doesn't have the same melodic flares either for most of it. But it did manage to get something compelling together out of its more minimalistic leanings and have more of a solid backbone. It does have a feel to it that sets it apart from his previous albums while still feeling recognizable as his work. I would not put it up on par with his best, but it is up to his usual standards. It's good, if not great. Maybe roughly on par with Memory Shell, I don't know. The main thing I like about this album is the fact that most of these tracks focus themselves around stronger percussion loops and breaks than before. They feel like they have more drive and more pulse and more energy than most of his stuff. The ambient pads and synth textures around it still have the same subtle, understated quality that most of his stuff has. In terms of individual tracks, I don't have a ton to discuss. The first 2 tracks are collabs with other Ultimae producers. The title track features Mahiane. She is the co-founder of Ultimae alongside Ace Dana. It remains in pretty subtle ambient territory for most of its running time, though switching up into some more hard-hitting breaks halfway through. Has some solid pulse to it, good opener. The second track, Unfold, features Mictech, which kinda had me worried given my general ambivalence towards Far and Off, but it does work pretty well too. Its mysterious pulsating synths and bell-like electric piano sounds were a nice textural addition, while still keeping a fast-paced, almost frantic but still subtle beat that I could tap my foot to. Not bad at all either. Would have been one of the best tracks if it were on Far and Off. Good tracks, but there were even bigger highlights after this. Nuphar Log was a dark and bassy ambient techno number with a conventional, if steady and driving beat underneath and lots of cool acid synths going around in the background. Quite a lush mix of synth pads in the background too that really helped draw me in. There were a couple of other tracks here that had old school acid synths in them too. Peace Corrosion was another one. Definitely a nice touch that I appreciated. Otherness probably had the hardest hitting breakbeats here in its second half. There were tracks with more ambient leanings that were nice too, like the mysterious tones of The Gradual District, or the much more refreshing feel of the closer, Juniper. And my 2 favorite tracks were probably Transparency Syndrome and Alep Offset, both drum and bass-ish tracks that maintained a lot of dramatic weight, and even some subtle melodic flares. They had a sense of urgency to them that I didn't get out in most of the rest of the album. But that's about all I got in terms of individual track discussion. There are some tracks on here like Akasi that didn't stick out to me at all or give me anything to say either, unfortunately. And I don't know if I would consider any of these tracks, even the best ones, to be on par with his best material. There's no Natty Natty or Bam or Anthrazit on this one that just stuck out to me like that. It's kind of hard to quantify, I will admit. I at least like this whole thing. There's no tracks on here that I outright dislike or didn't have something for me to enjoy, but I don't love any of it. Now, I do think it's worth noting that this album's release probably was not well timed for me. This came out the day before that new BT album, and I was really on the edge of my seat waiting for that. For this to come in and completely catch me by surprise, right at the end of the year too, when I was budgeting my time for other videos, probably didn't really work in this album's favor, because that ended up with me just kind of feeling the urge to pass this one by and get through this and move on to the next video. I even thought about just kind of sticking this into some stuff I missed video at some points. But I respect Ace Dana enough to put forth the effort into making a proper video highlighting him and give this at least 3 listens. I do think his stuff is really good and worth checking out. This album, admittedly, find it a bit hard to work up the enthusiasm for it that I might have been able to if it came out back around 2014, and I'm probably not going to hang on to it in the long term, certainly not year-end list material, but I did enjoy it. It was good. There's good stuff to be found here. If you've been a fan of his stuff before, it's worth a shot. I would more highly recommend checking out earlier albums of his like Season 5, Ley Lines, or Perimeters, but this was nice too, delivering a sense of subtlety and enveloping atmosphere that I would hope for out of him. Even had a bit of that organic feel still intact despite the colder synth textures. It's cool. Definitely had its moments. Kinda wish I could have gotten more excited for it, but you know, it was nice to have. Probably feeling a 6.7 out of 10, I guess. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.